It happened in silence, no announcement, no warning. Prince William signed the order and, with a single stroke, removed every trace of Camilla's family from the royal trusts. The monarchy didn't just tremble, it cracked. No one within the palace saw it coming. In an early morning meeting, under layers of discretion, William had summoned the Crown's legal counsel. Documents were drawn, quietly reviewed, and then, with deliberate certainty, signed into effect. Camilla's children, her grandchildren, and every extension of her family's entitlement to royal assets were erased from the financial ecosystem that had long cushioned them. What began as whispers of palace reform quickly detonated into an irreversible shift in royal power. It wasn't until hours later, ironically, just as the royals were preparing for a major public appearance, that the news leaked, catching even palace aides off guard. Phones buzzed, aides scrambled, but the truth was already spilling across news outlets, igniting headlines that would dominate the next 72 hours. Inside Buckingham Palace, a chilling hush fell over the halls. Staff avoided eye contact, unsure where loyalties now lay. Charles remained uncharacteristically quiet, not issuing a single statement. And Camilla, once the emboldened queen consort, retreated behind closed doors, blindsided by the gravity of the blow. She hadn't expected William to wield such ruthless authority. Certainly not now. Not when the monarchy was already fragile in the public eye. But the move wasn't random. It was precise, calculated, lethal. And it wasn't just a financial maneuver. It felt like a warning. Meanwhile, beyond the palace gates, a different storm was brewing. Instead of outrage, there was applause. Commentators praised the decision as long overdue. Online platforms lit up with support, calling William the People's Prince, Diana's son, and the protector of legacy. For many, it was a long-awaited purge of undeserved privilege. It wasn't just approval, it was vindication. The monarchy had taken too long to reckon with the controversies Camilla's family brought in tow, and William's actions signaled a hard reset. But buried beneath the praise was something deeper. Whispers. Rumors. This wasn't politics, they said. This was personal. Those close to William revealed that this decision had been simmering for years. That each slight, each quiet overreach by Camilla's family had been carefully noted. That this day was always coming. And when it did, it wasn't about titles or trusts. It was about restoring balance to a royal house that had become dangerously lopsided. But this wasn't just an act of royal housekeeping, it was retribution. And its roots reach back to a betrayal William could never forget. They were warned to stay quiet, stay in the shadows. But Camilla's relatives pushed their luck, and their greed lit the match that would burn down their royal privileges. From the moment Camilla was crowned queen consort, the family she brought with her into the royal fold walked a fine line. Whispers swirled within palace walls, rumors that her children and grandchildren were leveraging their newfound proximity to the crown for more than ceremonial appearances. But what started as harmless favoritism quickly turned into something more sinister. Quiet backroom deals began surfacing, transactions cloaked in layers of corporate anonymity, all tracing back to trust-linked royal properties discreetly rented out for private functions. Private profit was being harvested from assets meant solely for the future of the monarchy. The alarm bells didn't ring all at once. They chimed, quietly, methodically, until William could no longer ignore them. The final confirmation came through leaked documents. Invoices, property logs, and account summaries that told a tale of entitlement turned exploitation. A private villa, technically under royal custodianship, had been used repeatedly for elite guests connected to Laura Lopes's art network. A former royal stable, allegedly decommissioned, was found generating revenue through Tom Parker Bowles' culinary partners. The monarchy's most sacred financial vessels had been tapped like wells by those who were never meant to touch them. And buried beneath these revelations lay the most damning truth of all: the gentleman's agreement forged during Charles's coronation. The silent promise that Camilla's family would never meddle in state wealth had been shattered beyond repair. William didn't act alone. He couldn't. He summoned Princess Anne and the Crown's royal financial steward into a series of tense, off-the-record meetings. What they uncovered confirmed his worst fears. For years, discrepancies had been quietly written off as clerical errors. But now the pattern was unmistakable. What Camilla's family had done wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. a strategy to cement their relevance in a world that was never meant to be theirs. Even Catherine, typically composed and reserved, began to show signs of fury. A trusted aide overheard her tearfully lament that Camilla's grandson had crossed a line even Diana wouldn't believe existed. That single moment, unspoken in public, became the emotional pivot for William. In that instant, it all snapped into focus. This wasn't just about funds or property. This was about the erosion of boundaries that Diana had fought so hard to protect. William could no longer deny what had been brewing beneath the surface for years. His mother, maligned and manipulated, had always feared that Camilla's influence would one day contaminate the royal house. And now her warning had become a prophecy. The trust had been broken, not only with the monarchy's funds, but with the memory of the woman who gave him everything. But this wasn't just about financial misconduct. This was about legacy, honor, and a son defending his mother's memory. In every step William took, she was there, Diana's presence looming over the palace, whispering the truth he'd buried for decades. This wasn't justice, it was personal. For William, the corridors of Kensington Palace had always echoed with her absence. Every royal event, every photograph, every decision made without her served as a cruel reminder of the woman who once stood alone in that gilded prison, fighting silently for her sons. The world remembers Diana's final years as a tragic descent, but William remembered them differently. He saw the isolation, the manipulation, the glances exchanged between staff that told her she didn't belong. He watched her tears shielded from the cameras fall over wounds that no crown could heal. And when she was finally gone, it wasn't just a mother that was taken. It was truth. It was clarity. It was the shield that had protected him from the ruthless machinery of the monarchy. Now, decades later, that machinery had embraced the very family she feared the most. Camilla's rise was one thing, but what William could not stomach was the parade of privilege that followed in her wake. Her children, grandchildren, and extended relatives, none of whom carried a single drop of royal blood, now stood shoulder to shoulder with the monarchy's legacy bearers. And with every lavish gala attended, every exclusive estate accessed, William felt his mother's memory receding into the background. While Camilla's family celebrated status, Diana's name was being quietly pushed aside. No statues, no formal legacy committee, no seat at the high table, just a void. It was in one of his most vulnerable moments that he turned to Princess Anne. In a dimly lit private chamber, far from prying eyes, he broke down. He confessed how deeply he feared that Diana's legacy would be permanently rewritten by the very woman who had once competed with her in silence. Anne, ever the realist, offered him no comfort, only a piercing truth. Then stop letting them win. Those 5 words echoed in William's mind until they became a mission. And from that moment forward, he made a vow not to the crown, not to the public, but to the mother who died without closure. His vow was simple but resolute. He would never allow Diana's name to be diluted by opportunists. Her memory would not be used as a prop to elevate a family she had never welcomed. And in choosing to act now at this precise moment, with the monarchy standing at the brink of generational transformation, William knew the timing couldn't be more symbolic. With the public watching and the trust of the people shifting toward him and Catherine, his decision would not just be seen as administrative, it would be felt as retribution. But this choice didn't come without consequence. Tensions with Charles escalated behind closed doors. The king, trapped between his loyalty to his son and his devotion to his wife, found himself unraveling in silence. Camilla's grief over her family's exclusion clashed violently with William's defiance. The palace, once a fortress of tradition, was now a battlefield of buried loyalties. But even as the chaos brewed, William stood firm because for him, this wasn't just a decision. It was the final act in a decades-long promise to restore his mother's stolen dignity. But just as William took control, Camilla launched a desperate counterstrike, one that would tear open old wounds and ignite a new royal war. She didn't see it coming. She didn't expect him to be bold enough. But now, stripped of her influence, Camilla's rage boiled over, and the monarchy could feel the tremor. In the hours following William's stunning move, Queen Camilla's private quarters became the epicenter of chaos. Her raw, guttural, unrestrained scream pierced the centuries-old silence of the palace walls. Staff were dismissed. Doors slammed. The woman who had risen from scandal to coronation was now unraveling in a fury no one could contain. She had clawed her way to the top of a system that once rejected her, only to have it ripped out from under her feet by the very air she once thought she could mold. William's strike was not just unexpected, it was surgical. It left no room for recovery, no space for negotiation. And Camilla, once confident in her place beside the king, now found herself sidelined, humiliated, and powerless. Within minutes, she demanded an audience with Charles. But this was no ordinary conversation between monarch and consort. This was an emotional ambush. She accused him of betrayal, of cowardice, of choosing his dead ex-wife's son over the living woman who had stood by him for decades. Her words dripped with venom, striking Charles where it hurt most his guilt. And yet, he offered no resistance. He didn't defend William, but he didn't stop him either. That silence, more than anything, ignited Camilla's rage into something primal. She realized then that the battle was not just with William, it was with a monarchy that would never truly accept her bloodline. Royal staff, shaken by what they witnessed, began leaking pieces of Camilla's breakdown to the press. Headlines hinted at deep fractures within the royal circle. Rumors circulated of tears, threats, and objects thrown in fury. But Camilla wasn't finished. She began summoning allies, Prince Andrew among them, those with scores to settle and power to regain. Her strategy was simple. Build a coalition strong enough to pressure Charles, fracture William's base of support, and reinstate her family's position by any legal means necessary. Private lawyers were consulted. Royal trust documents were re-examined. If William thought she would go down quietly, he didn't know her at all. But the harder she pushed, the more isolated she became. Her desperation smelled like weakness, and even longtime allies hesitated to stand beside a queen whose grip on power was visibly slipping. Charles, meanwhile, stood at a heartbreaking crossroads. His loyalty to Camilla was being stretched thin by the resolve of his son. William hadn't just spoken for himself, he had spoken for the future. And that future no longer included Camilla's family. But just as the royal storm reached its peak, the people's voice thundered louder, echoing through every headline and public square. For the first time in decades, the public didn't hesitate. They didn't whisper. They roared with approval. William hadn't just made a royal decision, he became a royal symbol. Within hours of the announcement, social media exploded. Hashtags like "Justice for Diana" and "The People's Prince" surged to the top of trending charts across the globe. What began as a royal maneuver was now a populist triumph. William had taken a stand many thought impossible within the confines of a monarchy built on silence, and in doing so, he breathed life into a crown that had long felt disconnected from its people. Across the UK, headlines hailed his courage. Editorials praised his unapologetic commitment to Diana's legacy and his refusal to let the past be rewritten by those who had no claim to it. For a public that had grown tired of palace politics and silent scandals, this was more than refreshing. It was revolutionary. As William stepped out for a charity event days later, the applause wasn't just polite, it was thunderous. People reached out, not just to greet a future king, but to thank a grieving son who had finally drawn the line. Catherine stood at his side, graceful and unwavering, embodying the vision of a future monarchy built on authenticity and principle. It was clear now William wasn't following in Charles's footsteps. He was blazing his own path, and the public wasn't just following, they were running beside him. Polls shifted almost overnight. Approval ratings for William and Catherine soared to historic highs, while faith in the current throne quietly declined. The people had chosen their side, and it wasn't with Camilla. Her silence, so deafening in contrast, only added to the public's perception that she had overstepped, and now she was facing the consequences. Gone were the days when she could walk into a room and command presence. Now, her absence from royal duties was interpreted as shame, not diplomacy. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict, and it was final. Even seasoned royal commentators, those once careful not to stir controversy, began admitting the obvious. The tide had turned. William wasn't just being positioned as the next monarch, he was already being embraced as the true moral compass of the institution. His actions had revived a dormant loyalty to the crown, one that had been slipping away in the shadows of scandal, indifference, and privilege. Now, people believed again not in pomp and ceremony, but in purpose and strength. But while the people rejoiced, inside the palace walls, An inheritance war quietly began because royal trusts were only the beginning. They never spoke publicly, but behind the scenes, Princess Anne and Prince Edward moved like ghosts, aligning with William in ways that shocked even their closest aides. For years, Princess Anne had carried herself as the monarchy's most loyal workhorse, unflinching, blunt, and uninterested in palace theatrics. But privately, she had always held reservations about Camilla's growing influence. It wasn't jealousy, it was a principle. Anne had watched the royal institution bend and twist to accommodate Camilla's presence, and with every compromise, she saw the integrity of the crown being diluted. Her silence wasn't apathy, it was strategy. And now, with William standing firm, Anne saw her moment to act not for herself, but for the future she believed the monarchy had forgotten. At the same time, Prince Edward, the quiet steward of royal finances, had been watching with a meticulous eye. His role placed him closer than anyone to the numbers, the trusts, and the confidential transfers. He had noticed patterns, but he kept his suspicions close. That changed the moment William brought forward the evidence. It wasn't a demand. It was a confession of a son admitting that the monarchy had lost its moral anchor. And Edward, long underestimated, did what few expected. He joined him. No speeches, no declarations, just deliberate action. Access was quietly restricted. Accounts connected to Camilla's family were flagged. Funding channels were quietly severed, piece by piece, until the picture became undeniable. The royal firm was changing, and the door was closing. In a moment charged with symbolism, Anne handed William a personal item once kept locked in Queen Elizabeth's private drawer, a worn leather ledger containing the sovereign's handwritten notations. Among the names and dates, one entry stood out, a warning penned by the late Queen, emphasizing the importance of protecting the crown's bloodline from outside manipulation. That was all William needed. It was the past giving its blessing to the future. The quiet alliance between the siblings stunned royal aides. Whispers of private meetings between Anne, Edward, and William rippled through the palace. Staff who once thought Anne would remain neutral now realized she was far from passive, and Edward, so often dismissed as the invisible royal, had just proved to be one of the monarchy's most consequential actors. Their message was crystal clear. Camilla's family might have shared the table, but they would never hold the keys. And as the royal family began to realign, Camilla's children prepared to fight back with secrets of their own. They've always stayed in the shadows. But now, with everything stripped away, Camilla's children speak out, and what they reveal could fracture the monarchy forever. Tom Parker Bowles was the first to break the silence. Known more for his culinary career than royal commentary, he stunned the public with a sharp, thinly veiled attack on Prince William. In a carefully worded press release that quickly made global headlines, he labeled William a divider, not a leader, and accused him of turning the monarchy into a personal crusade for vengeance. The tone was polished, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. This was no passive plea for reconciliation. It was a shot fired from within the royal circle itself. And it was just the beginning. Laura Lopes followed closely behind, but her message cut deeper. Rather than diplomacy, she chose defiance. Enraged by the decision to remove her children's future from the royal trusts, she threatened legal action. Her lawyers cited promises made during Charles's ascension, verbal agreements and gestures that, while not binding, had been understood as a bridge of acceptance. Now, with that bridge burned, Laura was prepared to go to war. Her media allies framed her as a mother defending her children's dignity. Articles emerged framing her as the quiet royal outsider who had been left out of family photos, palace gatherings, and ceremonial honors. The image was powerful. Camilla's daughter, always present yet never fully embraced. Then came the leaks. Private conversations between Camilla and William, once confidential, found their way into tabloids. The exchanges were tense, emotional, and, at times, deeply personal. In one, Camilla reportedly accused William of trying to erase her family from royal history. Another quote, allegedly from William, read simply, "This isn't personal, it's preservation." But to Camilla's children, it felt anything but impersonal. The leaks poured fuel on an already raging fire. And then Laura did something that shifted the entire narrative. She agreed to a televised interview. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke of her childhood in the royal shadow. of never being addressed as part of the firm, of being paraded at events but excluded from real decisions. Her most haunting quote became a viral moment. "I was never accepted. Not truly. Not by them." The nation paused. This wasn't just a legal feud, it was an emotional unmasking. As tensions escalated, rumors swirled of a tell-all memoir being quietly drafted. Sources hinted it would expose not only the internal divides of the modern monarchy, but also secrets from decades-past conversations, betrayals, and the unfiltered truth of what it meant to be on the fringe of royal power. If published, it could fracture the institution more deeply than any scandal since Diana's own interviews. But just as Camilla's family pushed back, an ancient royal clause buried for generations surfaced, and it changed everything. Locked away in a private drawer of the late Queen's desk, a codicil hidden for years surfaced, and what it revealed sealed the fate of Camilla's lineage forever. It was Princess Anne who unearthed it. During a quiet review of the late Queen Elizabeth's most personal documents, a sealed envelope marked with the royal cipher was discovered, untouched since the final weeks of Her Majesty's life. Inside was a codicil, an amendment to her official will written in her own hand and witnessed only by Anne and two palace legal advisors. Its contents sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the monarchy. In crisp, unmistakable language, the Queen had issued a decree that would rewrite the rules of royal inheritance. From that moment forward, only direct blood descendants of the royal line would be permitted access to sovereign trusts, entitlements, or ceremonial privileges. Non-blood relatives, regardless of marriage or royal favor, were to be excluded entirely. Anne's role in its creation was more than administrative. She had been present when her mother signed it. She later confided to William that the Queen had grown concerned in her final years about the erosion of royal boundaries. Camilla's growing influence had unsettled her, but it was the thought of Camilla's family being seen as equals to her own bloodline that had shaken her to the core. In a moment Anne described as quiet but unshakable. The Queen had invoked the name of Diana not out of rivalry, but as a warning. "This is how legacies are lost," she had whispered, placing her pen to paper. When legal experts were consulted, the weight of the codicil became undeniable. Though not meant for public release, it had legal authority that superseded all informal arrangements made since Charles's ascension. It nullified any verbal promises or expectations offered to Camilla's family. Even William, who had already taken steps against them, was stunned by the document's finality. What had been a moral stance now had unbreakable legal footing. In a private meeting convened under the royal seal, William presented the codicil to the inner family. The room fell silent as he read it aloud. Camilla, defiant just days earlier, now sat motionless. Her face drained as she realized there would be no path forward, not through legal threats, not through Charles's sympathy, not even through public support. The monarchy had spoken from beyond the grave, and in that moment, any hope she held of preserving her family's standing was shattered. Charles, visibly shaken, offered no rebuttal. For all his love for Camilla, even he understood what was at stake. To challenge the codicil would mean challenging the final will of the longest reigning monarch in British history, his own mother. It would fracture the institution at its core, inviting scrutiny, division, and chaos. So, he stayed silent, and silence was all Camilla needed to know she had lost. Now, with legal ground beneath him and the people's support behind him, William had one final move to make, and it would cement his future as the monarch the people already saw him as. He didn't need a throne to be king. In the hearts of the people, William had already risen. But with one final move, he silenced centuries of noise and secured the crown's future. With the codicil in hand and the storm finally behind him, William made his next move not with fanfare, but with precision. He called upon the crown's most trusted legal and financial minds and formally restructured the royal trusts. The decision was swift, unflinching, and irreversible. For the first time in royal history, the future of sovereign wealth would be directed not by tradition alone, but by intent. George, Charlotte, and Louis were named as the rightful future trustees of the crown's legacy, ensuring that the trust, both literal and symbolic, remained within the bloodline. It was more than an administrative act. It was a declaration, a line drawn in stone that reaffirmed the monarchy's core identity and its future direction. The public response was staggering. Already galvanized by his earlier stance, the people now saw William not just as a future monarch, but as a leader who embodied transparency, accountability, and purpose. Approval ratings soared to heights unseen since the golden era of Queen Elizabeth. William had achieved something few royals had managed. He bridged generations. From elders who mourned Diana to young adults raised on media skepticism, the country now moved as one behind him. Charles, ever the symbol of quiet restraint, surprised many by taking to the podium days later. In a speech laced with reflection and emotion, he praised his son's judgment and strength. And while he never uttered the word abdicate, his language left little doubt. He spoke of transitions, of passing the torch, and of knowing when to step aside for the good of the institution. His voice wavered, but his message rang clear. The future belonged to William. Catherine, always graceful, stood beside her husband like a steady lighthouse in storm-tossed waters. But now, she wasn't just a partner, she was a presence. Draped in composure and purpose, she evoked the very spirit of Diana without trying to. Her quiet strength and unwavering loyalty became the embodiment of the new monarchy, one not built on ceremony, but on conviction. Together, she and William became more than heirs. They became anchors. With the internal battles settled and the public united, a rebranding of the monarchy was quietly introduced. It wasn't about changing the crown, but redefining its meaning. From press briefings to cultural engagements, one phrase began appearing everywhere: the people's crown. A monarchy not elevated above the people, but rooted in their values. It was bold, it was modern, and it was unmistakably William's. Meanwhile, Camilla began her quiet retreat. No statement, no farewell. Her public duties slowly disappeared from the royal calendar, and her family receded into the background. The storm she once stirred had passed, and history, with its merciless clarity, had chosen its path. William had not just restored order, he had reclaimed dignity. And so, as the bells tolled for a new beginning, the shadow of the past finally faded, and William's quiet revolution became a legacy Diana would have wept to see. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.